Everybody's favorite position, tight ends. So tight ends, everybody loves tight ends, right? Being a commissioner in a league of my own, I know that tight ends are one of the least favorite positions in fantasy football. In fact, it's kind of like three of the positions people obviously love. You got your quarterbacks, your wide receivers, your running backs, just putting up points, and typically you got your real easy plug and play players, but then you have your defense, your kickers, and your tight ends. And commissioners always getting hit up by members in the league trying to get them to remove kickers, defenses, and tight ends from the equation. And really the biggest reason for this is they're not easy positions. These other three positions, your quarterbacks, your wide receivers, running backs, all easy positions. But when you talk about tight end in particular, you as a fantasy owner get frustrated with them because they have the duality of being a blocker and a receiver, as opposed to being receivers running routes. Even on passing plays, tight ends aren't always out there running routes, catching balls for you, and that's frustrating. They're not all Travis Kelce's. They're not all Darren Wallers. Even to an extent, you get a quick drop off with the guys like Mark Andrews, which are still extremely valuable fantasy assets, but they're just not as consistent as a guy like Travis Kelce. So what do you do with this position? Well, one, you have to make sure that when you're going up against a team like that is a Travis Kelce owner, that you have ways to outscore them in other positions. So that's one of the advantages that you get out of a guy over an owner that drafts a Travis Kelce, is they're giving up another prime player at another position. So you need to be outscoring them at that position. At the same time, you need to be mining out those breakout candidates. We had guys like Robert Tonyan last year that came out of nowhere, and you need to find those guys in 2021. And that's what we're here to do. And we're going to start out with a short list of later round tight ends, starting in the 9th round with Irv Smith Jr., a guy that played 13 games in 2020, had 43 targets, 30 receptions, 365 yards, and 5 touchdowns, and not necessarily impressive numbers, but he was a guy that had to contend for targets and routes with a guy like Kyle Rudolph, a trusted veteran, to a guy like Kirk Cousins, who was always willing to look Rudolph's way in the red zone. Now, Rudolph's gone. He's a New York Giant. And we're looking at a guy, tight end, that was drafted high in the 2nd round, and is expected to be a key contributor and possibly even the third piece to this passing offense this year. He's supposed to take a big leap in his 3rd season, and there is just a ton of scuttlebutt coming out of places like Vikings.com praising not only his receiving skills, but his blocking skills. So this is a guy that's not going to be coming off the field just because he can't block. That's actually important when you're talking about trying to find a tight end outside of one of these main elite guys. Irv Smith, his stats up to this point, not super impressive, but you got to remember there was a veteran holding him back. He was in his first couple of years, and tight end is literally probably one of the hardest positions in the NFL to learn. So it takes time to learn that position, and you can expect possible huge breakout from Irv Smith, a 9th round investment at the tight end position for a extremely athletic tight end in an offense that's extremely efficient in the passing game. All right, so we're going to move on to round 10. Now, we got to think about round 10 as being one of those rounds that you do have to start swinging for some upside, and that just is across the board for every single position. So tight end, there's a couple different guys in this area, whether it's the end of round 10, beginning of round 11. There's a couple different guys, and we're going to start off with Tyler Higbee from the LA Rams, a guy that has been in your lineups, out of your lineups, on your rosters, off your rosters for the last couple of years, because we've seen the upside and we've seen the flashes, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that this guy is in Sean McVay's offense. However, there's been a couple things that's been holding him back these last couple of years. We think about a guy like Jared Goff, who's been really erratic with how accurate he's been passing the ball. Some days he looks really good. Some days he looks really bad. Guess what? That's bad for consistent value from your fantasy assets. Now, let's also think about the fact that he had a guy in Gerald Everett playing next to him. Well, Gerald Everett stealing snaps, stealing routes, stealing fantasy points from your team. So, well, why would you draft Tyler Higbee? Well, guess what? Goff gone. Shipped him off to Detroit. They brought in Matt Stafford, one of the biggest arms, one of the most prolific passers in the league the last couple years. And then you think about Gerald Everett, gone. Shipped a well, they didn't ship him. He just went to Seattle, found himself some greener pasture. That leaves Tyler Higbee, greener pasture. That leaves Tyler Higbee atop the tight end depth chart with one of the prolific offensive minds at head coach and one of the biggest arms and prolific passers in the league at quarterback. Yeah, I want to tap into that offense. And with a 10th round price tag, give me some Tyler Higbee. Now let's move on to a couple of the more complicated names on this list, both in the end of the 10th or beginning of the 11th round in Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, both going as the 16th and 17th tight ends off the board, and both have extremely high upside, especially when you consider their pedigree as probably the most reliable fantasy assets that are on this list today. However, unlike all the other names on this list, these guys have to contend with each other on the same team for the New England Patriots. Now, Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry both have different strengths, different weaknesses. Hunter Henry is one of the best dual tight ends as far as being able to block and be a valuable asset in the receiving game. Jonnu Smith is just a playmaker. He's an athletic freak, and he's a guy that is capable of making plays after the catch with the ball in his hands. And I think they are going to be utilized in much different ways in this offense. I think you're going to see that Hunter Henry is really big in between the 20s. I think you're going to see Jonnu Smith really big in the red zone. And I think it's quite possible that one of these guys is going to lead the New England Patriots in receiving yards, in receptions, and possibly even touchdowns this season. Now, most likely not on the last one there in the touchdowns, but we know that tight ends can be big-time touchdown monsters, and it's quite possible you see a guy like Jonnu Smith, who just last year had 8 touchdowns, sees that jump to double digits. It could be Jonnu Smith is a 1,000-yard 10 touchdown guy this season that you were able to get in the 11th round. That's the type of upside that you have with this guy. The problem with him is that you have the downside of he also might be a guy that has to share so much work with Hunter Henry that they just kind of negate each other from fantasy relevancy. And they're both just they're good enough to keep both each other from being relevant. And that's the scary part about this. But I think the upside with this is you could end up with a guy who's a top 5, top 6 tight end in the 10th or 11th round. Moving on, we'll go to the 15th round. Guy we've already mentioned in this video, Gerald Everett, moved on to the Seattle Seahawks. That's a great place to be right now as well. They have been looking for a tight end the last couple years, and they had a guy for about a season in Jimmy Graham where he was fantasy relevant. When you pair him up with the likes of Russell Wilson, you know, you always have a chance at fantasy relevancy. Now, we've seen the flashes from Gerald Everett in the past as well. He's had the same problems that Tyler Higbee's had. Tyler Higbee was there. Jared Goff was the quarterback. Well, guess what? Tyler Higbee's not there, and there's nobody else there really to steal the job from him. And then you think about the fact that you have Russell Wilson as your quarterback, and Russell Wilson is one of the most clutch quarterbacks at throwing touchdowns, and you look at that and the fact that he is more relevant in 6-point fantasy leagues than 4-point fantasy leagues. He throws touchdowns. I want to tap into that offense. A 15th round price tag for a guy that I very honestly believe also could be a top 10 tight end at the end of the season. This is a guy who very easily could catch 8 touchdowns by the end of the season. Russell Wilson is epically known for finding his tight ends in the red zone. He is pinpoint accurate, and that is an offense that I want a piece of. 15th round price tag. Are you kidding me? And then here's the one, the deep breakout candidate. This is not somebody I'm suggesting that you rush out and you draft right now, but I think he's a guy that should be on your radar and somebody that possibly by the end of the training camp that you are drafting. However, right now, tight end 44 according to Fantasy Pros ADP, we're talking about Jacob Hollister, who used to be in Seattle and found himself moving all the way across the country to Buffalo. Get paired up with Josh Allen, his old quarterback from college. Both played at Wyoming, both played together, both have familiarity, and we have seen the flashes from Hollister as well from his time in Seattle. You have to go back to 2019 to see exactly what he did and where that flash is, but his stats comparable to all the other guys basically in front of him for the last couple years. The upside is there. He's at a team that is desperately looking for a playmaker at the position. They're basically giving Dawson Knox one last chance. Otherwise, Jacob Hollister could win this job by the end of training camp, could be the starting tight end in one of the more prolific offenses in the league. And for a quarterback that has a chance at being an MVP, I wouldn't mind keeping an eye on that guy and possibly even using my last draft pick as a flyer on a tight end with major upside. You don't get one of these top guys, you need upside. Jacob Hollister has it. Gerald Everett has it. All of these guys have it. It just needs to come together. And a lot of these guys, this could be the season. This could be the season of the tight end. We say that every year. Most likely one or two of these guys, maybe even none, break out. But I very, very much see some very good things in the future for all of these guys for the reasons that I've said. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I'm Jesse Aszman, and this is Explicit Fantasy Football.